This is the DawgNation Post-Game Show, live from the UGA Bookstore in Athens. Brought to you by Kroger, R.S. Andrews, Jittery Joe's Coffee, Sir Gerald's, J. Stein Law Firm, and the UGA Bookstore. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Hello, everybody, and welcome into our DawgNation Post-Game Show. We're here live at the UGA Bookstore, where Georgia has escaped with a win, 24-14. Second half today, much better than the first. So we're going to talk about all of that here over the course of our next few minutes here together. And obviously, I know one of the things is going to be on your minds, and we're going to have a chance to let you weigh in. If you were not at the game today, if you've been watching on TV, you can step in and click into the comment section on any of our video platforms, Facebook or YouTube, or even on DawgNation.com. You can click in. You can join us live via Zoom. I know last week we were not able to do that. This week we will be able to take your calls, and you can have a chance to weigh in. And I'm guessing that many of you, based on the standard of a two-time national champion, based on the standard of a team that has not lost a game since December of 2021, and has only lost once over the course of the last 2+ years. Based on that standard, what we saw from Georgia in the first half today was obviously not up to that standard. I think different fans are going to have different opinions as to why that is, and I promise you that over the course of our time together, we will get to that. We will figure out what went wrong for Georgia, kind of leading to a third game of the season and a third slow start offensively, and this one, if Georgia was not careful, could have cost them the football game. This today, the slow start that Georgia got off to offensively, this could have led to a shocking upset loss that reverberated like the moment in 2019 did when the same South Carolina team came into Athens to win that game. It could have happened, obviously didn't, and so we'll talk about the slow start that enabled all that to take place. But I think if you're going to discuss all of that, and obviously over the course of our time together, we need to do that. If you're going to discuss that, I think you also have to discuss how Georgia responded once it was down and once things were not going its way in the first half. I think you saw a much better performance from UGA in the second half. I'm going to credit the transfer wide receivers. I'm going to credit the Georgia offense for finding a way to get Dominic Lovett and Rod Thomas involved. Pretty clearly, they gave Georgia a completely different spark there. And honestly, I thought that in the midst of performance of the Georgia defense, where early in the game here we see Georgia give up 2 touchdowns, the kind of thing that those of us who've gotten so used to seeing Georgia be darn near perfect defensively, we're not used to seeing. Obviously, in the second half and really throughout most of the final 3 quarters of the game, Spencer Rattler was held in check. South Carolina fans will tell you it's the Juice Wells injury that caused that to happen, and clearly that was something that certainly harmed South Carolina's efforts here today. But beyond that, you also had a much improved pass rush from what we've seen from Georgia against lesser opponents the last couple of weeks. Georgia really got after Rattler in a very effective way today. I'll give specific credit here to Mikhail Williams, who allowed all of that to kind of get going here. Georgia was much more effective in rattling Rattler's cage, no pun intended, and getting sacks. They had at least 3 today. That I thought that was one of the things that kind of helped Georgia step up and win this football game here today. So it was clearly a slow start. It was the kind of slow start where I think a little bit like the Missouri game a year ago, you went from thinking, oh, this may not be very pretty. For Georgia fans, this may not be tons of fun. All of a sudden, you were left to think, my gosh, I just hope Georgia finds a way to win this game. That's what you're obviously hoping for. And ultimately, that's what Georgia was able to do, shaking off that slow start, coming out and getting a win. So if you're here at the UGA Bookstore, our friend Kaylee Manziel has been here tonight, just like she has been all season long. Come on by and see us. We'll get you lined up right over here. We'll get you on. We'll give you a chance to speak to the rest of Dawg Nation. You can share your thoughts about the good, the bad, and everything in between when it comes to Georgia's win tonight against South Carolina. And if you're live watching us on video on one of our video platforms, YouTube, DawgNation.com, wherever else, you also have a chance to step in here, weigh in, have your voice heard. You can talk about what was kind of a wild night for Georgia, a tale of 2 halves, much more successful in the second half. Obviously, a first half to be forgotten, but before we forget it and before we move past it, got to step up and kind of talk about what went wrong there. And 2 names that my guess is we'll hear a lot on tonight's show. That's quarterback Carson Beck and offensive coordinator Mike Bobo. I'm guessing we're going to hear a lot about those 2 guys tonight. That's going to be true in almost any situation. The lightning rod for discussion, almost always going to be quarterback, almost always going to be offensive coordinator. And based on the way that Georgia played in the first half tonight, I think you would have to say that's not necessarily unfair. It's not wrong to say that you got to have a better performance from your offense tonight. Now, how do you diagnose it? What percentage of the blame do you put on Bobo for the plays that he was calling, for Carson Beck, the plays that he was executing, for an offensive line that seemed like they was a little bit slow getting started here today, although probably played a little bit better in the second half in its own right, even, by the way, after an Amarius Mims injury, which we'll talk more about here in a moment. How you diagnose the blame and how you chop all that up, I guess different people are going to have different takes on that, and frankly, that's one of the reasons we take calls, one of the reasons we have that kind of discussion. But one way or another, no matter who you point the finger at, pretty clearly Georgia has got to play better through 2 quarters than it did tonight. And I don't mind telling you this. I mean, listen, I'm a loudmouth, but I try not to be a blowhard from the standpoint that if I shoot my mouth off about something, if I make a big opinion, and if it's wrong, I want to revisit that and admit that. And I told you all week long, and I told you very loudly on Friday, that I thought that Georgia would come out, would dominate this football game today. I thought this would be kind of reminiscent of some of what we've seen before, where a year ago against better competition, Georgia stepped up and played its best. They've obviously dominated South Carolina the last 2 years. Well, that wasn't this today. This is going to be a little bit different type of Georgia story. This is going to be a little bit of a different type of Georgia team. This is a Georgia team that right now seems like it's still feeling itself out a bit. And I think that there are a lot more questions than answers right now for UGA after 3 games, and a very slow start offensively is the kind of thing that's going to be a hot topic all night long. So with that said, we'll get you live here at the UGA bookstore. We will get you on our comment section there as well. First up tonight, our good friend Isha, great commenter there on our DawgNation Facebook page, and also a very, very astute Georgia fan who's watching everything very closely here. Isha, make sure you unmute yourself. Go ahead and pop on the air here and get us started. Tell me what you thought about Georgia tonight. How worried or bothered were you by that slow start? And how impressed were you by the fact that Georgia was able to shake that off and still find a way to come out and get a win here tonight?
Well, hey, hello, B. Nice to be here today. Didn't get a chance to catch you the first time. I was trying to get through, but I couldn't get in on the first game we did this. I know it was messed up the last. But I know.
Sure.
Honestly, that was pretty cool. I knew that they would probably come back. I wasn't worried. I was a little upset that they let them score a couple times because of the defense where we were playing. I think they needed to get out of that. They was playing a lot of soft zone and letting him get out of the pocket a little bit on some stuff. But other than that, it was just a key mistakes on offense and misplays and blocks that we missed out on a lot. On some of those plays. And that's what hurt us in that first half. I know a lot of my Georgia fans was probably throwing stuff during the game. I just figured they come back. I know the talent on the offense. I know once they get going and move some plays and that we were going to have a better showing. I think we missed out on a couple of plays, but because of turnovers, because of penalties. But other than that, I mean, it's some of these guys' first SEC gameplay. So you know it's gonna be a little tension, a little tightness in their chest. They ain't gonna come out and say it, but you're gonna get nervous in a game. It's just gonna happen. I'm sorry. I've been playing football for a long time. This year was the first year that I haven't, but you're going to get nervous. It's just part of it. So they might have been too hyped up and too into it and just did some things wrong. And so we got to give them a little break. We'll see how they do these next few games. I mean, it's going to be a poetry in motion. We could be like Alabama right now is losing. I mean, it's winning 10-3 over Tulane. South Florida. So it could be worse than that. So just think about it. And they switching quarterbacks like I don't know what.
Yeah. Isha, you're a great commenter. I appreciate you weighing in right there, and I think you bring a lot of wise words to the table. Thank you so much for calling us here tonight. And by the way, you all can do exactly what Isha did. Whichever video platform you're watching on, there's a link in that chat to click into. You can step in here. You can join us, and the good, the bad, the ugly, everything in between, you can weigh in on that. And I think it's interesting, and Isha's, as I said before, I think his words are really wise here, that what you've seen from Georgia the last couple of years perhaps brings about a level of confidence of well, Georgia might be able to shake this off. Georgia might be able to move past this because we've kind of seen them do that before. But on the flip side of that, as Isha also points out, hey, there are a lot of guys out there tonight for Georgia, this afternoon for Georgia, that haven't quite been in this role before. Carson Beck's the easiest to point to because he's the brand new starting quarterback, but there are other guys who are having more asked of them than we're used to. There are other guys, along this offensive line even perhaps, that are kind of doing some of this for the first time here. There are guys who are going to have the football delivered to them, playmakers for your offense who are kind of in this role for the first time. The absence of Javon Bullard on defense are going to put guys in that secondary into a spotlight they haven't often been in. And so for these guys today, this was their first chance to answer that call. And I'll repeat what I said a little bit a moment ago, which is, I think one of the mistakes I probably made coming into this afternoon's game, was the assumption that the vibe and the mood around Georgia today would be a carryover from where Georgia was for most of last season. And honestly, what you see is that's kind of a severed notion. Right now, this is not the same Georgia team. Now, it does not mean that the Georgia can't have the same result as it finished last year with. That's still our pick that it will. Our belief is that nothing's really changed for Georgia, despite the, kind of sloppy first half of this one here today. But in terms of being able to know and be guaranteed of what you'll get from UGA in games like this, the way that perhaps you felt like for most of last year you would, right now that's not necessarily the case for UGA. We're going to go back on the phones here in just a moment. I'll also remind you, if you're watching us on video here at the moment, you'll see me wearing a really nice shirt today. This is actually a really cool thing. I love the old school dog face logo, the Georgia logo. And down here on the first floor of the UGA bookstore we're broadcasting from tonight, they have the Peter Millar line, and they had one of these really cool Peter Millar golf shirt style shirts with the dog face logo right there on the chest. And when I saw that today, I just absolutely had to have that. I like getting stocked up for game day here at the UGA bookstore. If you want to be the best looking dog you can be, UGA bookstore is the best place to get all of that. And so I'm wearing a brand new shirt today, which if it can look good on me, it'll look even better on you, I can promise you that. So make sure you check that out at the UGA bookstore. We're happy to be here tonight. Really thrilled to be wearing a brand new shirt, courtesy of Peter Millar here from the UGA bookstore there as well. So really, really fun stuff to get stocked up for the season that's still on its way. So Isha got us off and running there with some comments. Ryan Walker's next up. Ryan's also a great commenter there as well. Ryan, help us make sense of this. There was some good. There was a lot of bad to begin with. Ultimately, Georgia stays undefeated. But this did not feel like the Georgia team that we're used to seeing. What did you make of what you saw?
Well, first off, I'm a little upset at you because you didn't show my golden shoe of Makai Muse. We call him Danger Mouse. He's not Mighty Mouse. Hines Ward was Mighty Mouse first, so we had to give the young fella his own nickname. He made a couple of good plays out there. But the guy who stood out today was Tyke Smith, the cat from West Virginia, North Philly guy. Came in, made tackles, made an interception at the end of the game, and also really showed the fact that he was all over the place. So in the secondary, we have guys that have range. The issue that we have is Michael Williams started to get off a little later. We've got to get better with having a better pass rush and a better push with that interior defensive line, and we've got to get better with tackling ball carries. Fundamentals, we got to go back to the drawing board and get back to tackling players fundamentally and being fundamentally sound with our tackling. That's just piss poor effort. Just hands down. This is unacceptable of the Dogs. I'll take the win. But the other issue that we have to get better at is protecting the passer. We've got to get better at being able to have the offensive line from your center, your guards on down, just being able to give Carson Beck some time. Because you see when we gave him time, he was able to pick guys apart. And he works better in an up-tempo style passing offense because he can hit guys across the middle, and he also, can put the ball on the outside. Had a couple of missed throws, 2 missed touchdown opportunities. Early at the game, he had Dylan Bell running down the sideline. The other one with the flea flicker, he missed Brock Bowers. We've got to get Bowers involved a little bit more, but we've also got to get C.J. Smith involved a little bit more. He's sure-handed, and the other guy that's got to get some more touches is Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint. And shout out to Dejon Edwards, a.k.a. Little Terrell Davis, for coming in there and toting the rock like he did. He did his thing today, and as we said before, we've got to start out fast. We cannot start off slow getting into SEC play because it's not going to be too many more games where we can just come back from behind. We got resolve. We're tough. We showed that we have resiliency. Yes, Kirby wanted to see him punched in the mouth. You go down 14-3, and then you come back and win it 24-14. hey, that shows a lot, but we've got to get better all the way around. It's a good win, but we've just got to get better. And Jordan Hall did his thing today coming in the game and making some big plays. I expect a lot from the young man in the future, B.A.
Ryan, great call. I appreciate that. I think you bring up a lot of good points. I want to go through a few of these, and thank you so much for being with us here tonight. Starting with Brock Bowers, here was one of the things that concerned me tonight about Georgia offensively as it relates to Bowers. This ought to be the easiest thing you have in the playbook. And I felt like tonight, I keep saying tonight because the sky was kind of dark. It's actually this afternoon. But this afternoon, 3 of the attempts that Georgia made to get the ball to Bowers were like sort of trick play variety. The one was like a double reverse flea flicker type thing. I'm sorry, it should not be that hard to get Brock Bowers the ball. 2 of the other carry opportunities Bowers had, and by the way, a year ago, carrying the football, Bowers had an amazing game against South Carolina. Today, though, it just seemed like Georgia was trying too hard to do something with a weird wrinkle to get the ball to Bowers. Bowers ought to be the easiest button you push in the entirety of the game. And when I think of like the disjointed nature of the Georgia offense for a lot today, it's some of the stuff to Brock Bowers that I felt like was probably the best overall representation of that, because it just seemed like Georgia was having to try too hard to get the ball to a guy who is always open all the time, and that was one of the things that I think was probably a little bit concerning. Now, can that be fixed? Of course it can, but it was a little bit eye-opening for us here today. And the other point that Ryan brings up, which I think is also a really good one, which is that it was a little bit surprising, and I don't mind telling you this, I think I used the word on Twitter earlier today, shell-shocked, a little bit shocking to see South Carolina having success on both lines of scrimmage, especially in the first half. That we're not used to seeing a Georgia quarterback not having enough time to make a throw, and today that Beck was sacked a couple times, if not hurried, a couple more times, other than that. We saw South Carolina with its own pass rush have a little bit of success against Carson Beck. That's a little bit surprising. The other big issue that comes up with the Georgia offensive line is the injury to Marius Mims. We saw him leave. He went back to the locker room, came back out. He was obviously out for the game on crutches. It looked like that left ankle was being tended to there, so that's a pretty serious issue for a guy in Mims, who I think pound for pound is one of Georgia's most talented players. It certainly seems like on the basis of this image, you could be without him there for a little while. So the Georgia offensive line probably did not have its best moments today in pass protection, something that was probably really good at the first 2 games, but perhaps a little bit of regression there against South Carolina here today. And then, at the same time, you kind of saw, Georgia, perhaps unable to kind of establish everything it wanted to with its own defensive line of scrimmage there in the first half of this game. So a lot of concerns, a lot of things that Georgia wants to work on, but to kind of put a positive spin on this again before we go back out to the phones, the other thing I'll tell you is if you were in the stadium and if you're driving home, you can stop by and see us and you can give your thoughts here at the UGA bookstore. But I think you'll join me in saying that this crowd, with the rain coming down, with Georgia kind of playing poorly, with the vibe, frankly, pretty weird. Social media was pretty negative at halftime, as you probably thought that it would be. This Georgia crowd did not give up at all. And you would have thought this was, Georgia-Tennessee like last year, or any of these big games, Georgia-Notre Dame from 2019. This crowd got after in such a huge way, and I felt like this Georgia team was able to feed off that. So credit to the Georgia fans who were in the stadium. They didn't let the rain bother them. They didn't let the slow start from Georgia cause them to sit on their hands. They got up. They got loud. They made a bunch of noise, brought a lot of energy for a third and fourth quarter of this game in which Georgia really, really needed it. Credit to them for making that happen here today. Back to the phones we go. Cassie Turner, one of our great commenters, she's going to join us. Cassie, make sure you unmute yourself. We're glad you're here. Go ahead and give us your thoughts, Cassie. How did you feel? Slow start, got a little better. What do you think Georgia is right now?
I definitely think that they're at a point where they need to learn from what they're doing, or they're not going to do, I think they need to absolutely learn from this ugly win, because, yes, it was an amazing comeback, but it was an ugly win. I think that if they learn from this and they pivot and they continue to fill in where their gaps are and fix those mistakes that they're making, especially in the first half, I think that they'll be okay. But if they don't, then we're going to look at a different Georgia team than we've seen the last 2 years.
No, Cassie, I think that's really well said. And I think I'll give you a specific example of what I think you're talking about that I kind of noticed is, the clock rules are different this year. Games are going by fast. Georgia got the ball one time in the first quarter today. So in a situation like that, when you've got one possession, when Georgia likes to play at a little bit of a more deliberate pace than some other teams do, so when you're playing a little slower, and when you're kind of scuffling and when you're not taking those deep shots looking for your own explosive plays, when you got that, situation going on, then you put yourself in a position where you're not scoring enough points necessarily to put one of these teams that South Carolina is supposed to be much weaker than you're not going to score enough points to put them away. That Georgia's got to be very, very careful here in terms of how being a big favorite almost every week, even point spread, perception, however you want to describe them. With the clock rules shortening the game, it creates an opportunity for underdog-type teams to keep it a little close, so if they're able to step up, make a big play or two, then all of a sudden the entire tone of a game can completely change because of that. So, Cassie, as far as the point you bring up about what you can learn and how you can improve and get better from this, that's specifically one of those things I think you got to be careful about is I saw Georgia in the first half. Now, in addition to they just weren't really clicking, and most of the plays they were calling just weren't really working for whatever reason. We can talk about what that is. Beyond even just the general ineffectiveness of the Georgia offense overall, beyond that, you also have the situation where when you're content to nibble, when you're content to go a few yards at a time, when you're content to kind of go with the same, kind of screen style of passing over and over, when you're content to do that, you're creating a game that's probably shorter than you want it to be. That's certainly advantageous to your opponent. And Georgia, for the first half of this game, from where I was sitting, it just didn't really seem like they were even trying a lot of the explosive plays that have been the hallmark of this offense the last couple of years. And, I think it's just a flat-out truth that the Georgia offense for the season has to be better than what it was today. And you can decide who to blame for that. Obviously, that's kind of what post-game conversations are all about. We can kind of just figure out where to point the finger at. But, I'm almost more interested in just the flat bottom-line results. The last couple of years, not only has Georgia been the best defense in the country, I believe, but they've been one of the best offenses. And it's that marriage, as Kirby Smart has called it, complementary football, both sides of the ball, that has allowed Georgia to be as successful as it is. Well, to be fully that complementary when you get into the stretch drive of this season, Georgia offensively has got to be much better than it was today. I believe Cassie's absolutely right about that. Our next call here live on our DawgNation Post-Game Show at the UGA Bookstore. And if you come by here, you can get a good-looking shirt just like the one I'm wearing right now. As you're leaving the stadium, pop on by and see us. First floor of the UGA Bookstore, a great place to get some great apparel, including like the Peter Millar shirt that I'm wearing today. This is great looking, very, very comfortable, very, very, decked out here for the rest of the season. I feel like I am today. Mark Cole, you're next up here on our DawgNation Post-Game Show live from the UGA Bookstore. Mark, make sure and mute yourself and go ahead and let us know what you felt like you saw from Georgia's win today against South Carolina.
Good evening, Blaine and Adams. I'm really happy that the Dogs came back and won. I'm really happy that we hunkered down at the faithful mother. My only concern is on the offensive side. We were severely lackluster, and to me, I think we need to have a four-quarter performance on offense, not just on the defensive side. And I will give credit to Spencer Rattler. He did really well on as a quarterback due to our defense.
Yeah, Mark, that's a good call, and I appreciate that. I think you bring up two really good points. First of all, on the Rattler side of this, I do think there's certainly nothing wrong with giving credit to the performance that Rattler brought to the table today. This is one of the best quarterbacks in the SEC, and I think we're trying to decide right now what the current status of SEC quarterbacks are. How good of a quarterback does Georgia have? I think we're still trying to figure that out. How good of a quarterback does Alabama have? I think we've seen enough to know this Alabama quarterback situation right now is a total mess. So in a situation in which some of the quarterbacks around the league have just not really played all that well, in a situation like that, a guy like Rattler who's got some experience, he's a veteran, he's been in this league, a guy like that's a pretty formidable competitor, and I think he showed you that today. This is a guy you got to show some respect to. Remember, at the end of last season, he's making big plays to help South Carolina beat Tennessee, to beat Clemson. So Rattler, at one point in time when he's getting benched at Oklahoma, you can make the case as an elite recruit, not quite living up to the hype, that he may have been a little overrated back then. Well, he's actually now kind of hung around for a while. South Carolina's perhaps just off the radar enough that maybe at this point in time he may be a little underappreciated, maybe a little underrated, and I thought he had a really good game today. And so, Mark, I'm glad to hear you give him some credit because this is the kind of quarterback that can kind of keep his team in the game, and frankly, the kind of quarterback that probably covers up a lot of blemishes for the rest of his roster. I think that's probably pretty appropriate to say. And I think on the flip side of that, I don't think there's anything wrong, and obviously, we're all as happy as we can be about back-to-back national championships for Georgia, and, frankly, I think it makes moments like this a little bit less pressure-packed because we've all had a chance to enjoy so much success. In fact, as I look around here right now, I see two-time national championship shirts all across the folks here at the UGA bookstore, so we've all got the hardware to kind of make us a little bit more relaxed in situations like this, but we're also football fans that just sort of like talking about the game. We like breaking it down, and I don't think there's anything wrong with just kind of calling it out for what it was today, a performance that was not quite good enough. And I think it leads to a lot of curiosity about, okay, well, what is Georgia going to be offensively right now? Why weren't there more big, explosive opportunities in the first half? You're left to conclude, well, the continued absence of Ladd McConkey was once again not dressed for Georgia today. It sounds like that back injury for him is – this is not just a precautionary injury here at the moment. I expect him to still be back playing at some point in time this year and hope it's for the majority of the year. But this is not one of those situations where, like they have said about Dajon Edwards the last couple of weeks, he could have gone, just chose not to. McConkey hasn't dressed for a game yet this year. So that gives you an idea of, kind of what he's dealing with by comparison. Javon Bullard, who didn't play, was dressed. So that's just a little bit different vibe. If McConkey's healthy, is that the deep option, the deep shot guy that seems to be missing from this offense here right now? I think it's pretty obvious in the second half of this game when Georgia knew it absolutely had to move the chains. Who is it going to continuously right there? Dominic Lovett. We thought he'd be a very valuable weapon. Based on the second half of today's game, you're led to believe that he will. Rob Thomas there, too, a guy that has experience in this league. Different kind of offense playing for Mike Leach, but pretty clearly experience in this league, and that's a guy that Georgia went to there, too. Marcus Rosemy-Jackson. We had, I think, Ryan, our caller, brought him up a little earlier. He's a guy that makes some big throws. So, it's a day in which the Georgia offense left a lot to be desired, but you saw, kind of the hierarchy of playmakers start to emerge a little bit. It's going to be Rosemy-Jackson. It's going to be Lovett. It's going to be Ra Thomas, and when healthy, it's going to be Ladd McConkey there too. What was going on in terms of the sort of weird vibe around Brock Bowers and I would say somewhat weird play calling that Georgia attempted to employ to get the ball to him. That's one of those things I hope you can kind of get some answers to, and we'll continue to do that here live at the UGA bookstore. So pop in here, give us your Zoom calls. If you check in on any of our video chats, like the chat section on the video platforms, you can click that link, join the show. You can step in here, you can weigh in here, and we'll get a lot of that conversation going. We'll also read some old school comments here via some of those platforms there as well. We'll give out our play of the game here coming up. We're going to talk to Jeff Sentell here coming up too. We'll let Jeff give his thoughts. Mike Griffith is going to join us here before our show's done today there as well. So we are going to cover a lot of ground here over the course of the next few minutes, and can't wait to do that with you there as well. And while I have a moment, I guess, here, before we get back to the phones, let me also take a moment to award our player of the game here. Michael Carvel, who did our audience vote in as player of the game here for today? Is that a Dajon Edwards vote? Is it Edwards who came away with the player of the game today? Go ahead and let us know that. We'll show that on the screen here, and we'll give out a player of the game. Edwards does go over 118 yards today, so he finds the 100-yard mark for Georgia today, 118 yards and a touchdown. That's what Dajon Edwards is able to do. So if you're looking for those bright spots from Georgia here today, that is certainly one of those. The fact that Georgia did get a healthy Dajon Edwards back. Edwards was able to go over 100 yards rushing here today. So that was certainly a good thing to be able to see Georgia getting that done. So we will give you the player of the game here, courtesy of our friends at J. Stein Law. In fact, we'll get ready to do that for you here coming up in just a little bit. I'll also read some of your comments here there as well as we roll on here. DawgNation Post-Game Show live here from the UGA bookstore, reacting to a 24-14 win for Georgia against South Carolina. And yes, I was correct. Dejon Edwards is our DawgNation player of the game. So let's give him a shout out for that. Certainly congratulations on being able to do that. And a big thanks to our friends at the J. Stein Law Firm for bringing this player of the game to us here on our DawgNation Post-Game Show. Of course, if you've been hurt or injured in an accident, you want to be made right. You want to get the compensation you deserve, and that's what our friends at the J. Stein Law Firm give you a chance to do. This is a great group of folks. Josh Stein, the lead attorney there, is a two-time graduate of Georgia. We call that a double dog. He graduated from the UGA Law School. And the cool thing about the J. Stein Law Firm is that, so many of these like really big personal injury firms, perhaps they got thousands and thousands of clients, and maybe you don't get the individual attention you maybe feel like you deserve. Well, that's never going to be true when it comes to the Josh Stein and his friends at the J. Stein Law Firm. You're going to get the individual attention you deserve. Your case is going to get the special attention that it needs. You're not going to just be another number to them or another file to them. You're going to be someone they're going to put great care towards taking care of, and great care towards making sure that you get exactly what you need. That is what the J. Stein Law Firm is all about. So please make sure you find them online. That's jsteinlawfirm.com. Stein is spelled S-T-E-I-N. jsteinlawfirm.com. Make sure you find them there today. All right, while we have a moment, I'm going to pop over here. I'm going to read a couple of comments via YouTube. We'll get some of those via the DawgNation homepage there as well. Georgia fans reacting to a big win for Georgia here today against South Carolina, a game that probably did not start off the way a lot of Georgia fans wanted it to, but it certainly finished with the dogs on top, which is what we like to be able to see. A lot of the folks over here on the DawgNation homepage are talking about the Alabama score. Apparently, Alabama is still struggling there with South Florida. What is the score right now? Apparently, Alabama is still struggling a little bit with South Florida. So, listen, I guess things could be worse for UGA. Thomas T-Bone 86 also says that it was a big win for Georgia, now getting to 3-0. And, yeah, listen. All right, so it's 10-3. So Bama is winning right now, 10-3, but obviously not what Crimson Tide fans were hoping. So I guess it could be worse here. Georgia, gets the win in the second half against South Carolina, staying undefeated. Alabama struggling here against a South Florida team that's not even really the same universe as the Alabama program's supposed to be. So there you go. Jeremy Harbin also said it was a great win. Certainly the way that Georgia responds here in the second half, I think you'd have to say that was a pretty great win and a pretty great performance. And you are certainly very happy to be able to see that. See the way that Georgia responded. I heard at the end of the broadcast today, and I know that Gary Danielson's not necessarily everybody's cup of tea, but and here at the UGA bookstore where we're broadcasting from, the audio from the game was playing, and you heard Danielson say that he felt like this was exactly what Georgia needed. He felt like that it was the kind of game in which, hey, they could build some confidence because they won the game, but also have something to build on in terms of where they want to go from here. And it'll be very interesting to see how much of that kind of language, how much of that kind of idea mirrors what Kirby Smart has to say after the game. Because I think by perception you would assume that's some of the kind of stuff that Kirby Smart kind of also believes too. He's talked a lot about complacency. Well, you would certainly hope that there's nothing in the way of complacency coming after this game here tonight, because I think Georgia clearly found out tonight that if it's not careful, it can lose anytime it goes out there. Even as a 4-touchdown favorite here at home, they can still be in danger of losing. So if there was any issue with complacency before tonight's game, you would certainly hope that's erased and eradicated after this. So maybe Smart, whether he acknowledged that in his post-game press conference or not, maybe what Gary Danielson said is true, and maybe this really is the kind of thing that Georgia really needs here at this point in the season. Ultimately for me, though, and I'll get more of your comments after this, ultimately for me, though, I don't want to chalk this up to, well, I guess Georgia had, the big head. I guess, Georgia's, whatever, complacent, to use the word that Smart's used. I mean, ultimately for me, this comes down to decisions made in game, execution made in game that should have made this game at the beginning easier than it was. To me, that's not about complacency or leadership or those types of things that sometimes coaches want to kind of gravitate towards. To me, this is a lot more about, a strategy that allows you to come out and attack, show some aggressiveness, especially on the offensive side against South Carolina early, and build the kind of lead that gives you a chance to do what you did most of last season, which was coast to easy victories. I'll get one more of your comments here. Anthony Spano says I'm ducking comments that don't help him spin his narrative. I feel like we've been pretty even-handed here today. I'm not sure, Anthony, what narrative you'd like to see me hit more, but I feel like we've been pretty even-handed here today on all of that. Let's see what else. Uncle Sam says we were lucky to come back with no red zone passing attack. Yeah, I mean, that to me is going to end up being one of the places in which I think that Georgia is going to really be put to the test here a little bit this year, because like one of the things that last year, if you want to compare Georgia as a 2021 national champion to a 2022 national champion, one of the ways in which Georgia was way better last year than it was 2 seasons ago when it won its first national championship under Kirby Smart was the performance in the red zone. If you'll remember, there were portions of the year in 2021, even though statistically speaking, Georgia was a really very good offense, even though they had very impressive numbers offensively, one of the areas in which Georgia was really struggling offensively was in the red zone. Well, last year, for the most part, that wasn't really the issue. Now, I haven't gone back and charted every red zone possession that Georgia had a year ago to tell you exactly why that is. One of the things we can perceive here is that Georgia had the value in the red zone a year ago of having Stetson Bennett as a rushing quarterback. Think about all the rushing touchdowns that Bennett had for Georgia last season. Those rushing touchdowns were an incredibly valuable asset down there in the red zone. Well, that's not here anymore. Now, Carson Beck had a wonderful rushing play himself here today, but for the most part, no one's going to confuse Beck with Bennett in terms of his overall running ability as a quarterback. So that does create an additional challenge in the red zone. That's true. I'm not going to sugarcoat that at all. It creates a much different challenge in the red zone. And some of the stuff that seems to be the highest comfort zone for Bobo with Beck right now, some of the shorter throws, the screen game, the wide receiver screen game, hard for me to say, wide receiver screen game over near the sideline, some of that kind of stuff that probably works more in the middle of the field than it does as you get closer to the goal line. All of that becomes much more challenging and much more difficult down there. And so much like it maybe was in 2021, some of those issues for Georgia in the red zone may pop up again here this year. And I agree. That's going to be one of those things that we have a chance to see more about. We'll get back to your phone calls live here on Zoom here coming up. So if you want to click that chat, you can join us in the show. We're going to hear from Jeff Sentell in a minute. We're going to hear from Mike Griffith in a minute there, too. We also have some folks going to join us here live on the show here right now as well. You can step on over and be a part of the program. You can tell us what your name is, and then we'll talk about what you saw from this Georgia game tonight. What's your name?
Hey, B.A., I'm Don, and that's my wife, Julie, and our dog, Miko, from Columbus, Georgia. Hey, never apologize for winning. It's tough to win in this league. I think the team grew up in the second half. They have some things to work on. It's a coachable moment. We're looking forward to it. The rest of the season, we're looking forward to the Invasion Nation on the Tennessee River.
You guys going to be there?
We're there. We got 2 tickets.
Oh, that's great to hear. Yeah, that's going to be a great moment and going to be so much fun. And speaking of kind of, great vibes and good moments with fans, are you like me? I mentioned this a little earlier. I thought one of the cool moments from tonight's game was even though there were maybe first half moments where it would be easy for Georgia fans to get a little anxious, a little nervous, to sit on their hands perhaps and not make a bunch of noise, how much did you think this Georgia team fed off that Georgia crowd in the third quarter of this game especially? I thought they really brought a lot of energy right there.
Oh, absolutely. The crowd matters. You could see the penalties, but you could just see how the players react to the energy from the fans. It got a little wet, but nobody left, and so a good win.
It absolutely was. Well, Don, thanks for coming over and being a part of the show. We'll see you late in November for the DawgNation Invasion on the Tennessee River. Yeah, so great to see a good Georgia fan, excited about all of that, and a really good comment there, too. And I think that a perspective is really, really important here. And as I said, we're going to try to balance both these things. I don't have a problem having a football conversation today, and what we all just watched was a football game. And when you have a football conversation, you can talk about what was good, you can talk about what's not good, and I don't mind anybody saying, hey, this has got to be better, and that's got to be better, and what's going on here. I don't have any problem with any fan asking tough questions, giving strong opinions. I think that's appropriate. I do. But I think the balance of that is that even in the midst of an otherwise, kind of slow, shaky start for Georgia, even in the midst of all of that, there was still a lot to like for UGA. And much like perhaps the Missouri game was the building block for Georgia for the rest of last season, maybe this South Carolina game can be that for Georgia here right now. However, even as I say that, the one thing I want to make very clear, and I want to make sure we openly acknowledge, is the big difference between September for Georgia this year and September for Georgia a year ago, when Georgia had its struggle games against Kansas State, and Samford, and when it had its struggle game against Missouri on the road. All of those moments for UGA came after it showing exactly how good it could be against Oregon, against South Carolina. Georgia arguably played not just its two best games of the season, but in a national championship year, maybe playing as well as anybody has all year long in those games to begin last year. That's just kind of what you sort of felt like you saw there. Very, very strong performances from Georgia. We haven't seen that yet this year. So if you want to say, okay, well, based on 3 weeks here right now, based on kind of a mid-September evaluation, based on a sort of mid-September evaluation, I think you'd have to say right now that Georgia is not at the same point right now that it was a year ago. This is a Georgia team that's probably not quite taking those strides. I don't think anybody should have questioned at all Georgia's the number one team, early portion of last season based on how well it played to begin the year. Probably more fair to question that here right now because we really haven't seen through 3 games Georgia really fully put it together yet. We have not seen that yet, but perhaps we will in the weeks to come. A guy who is in Gainesville, Florida tonight, getting ready to watch Florida and Tennessee take place here. Kind of an interesting matchup there in the SEC East. But he also had his eye on the Georgia Bulldogs Day there as well. It's Mike Griffith here from DawgNation, joining us here on the DawgNation Post-Game Show. We're live here at the UGA bookstore. Mike, Georgia's absolutely dominated South Carolina the last couple of years. Not quite able to do that today. What did you make of what you saw?
Well, I thought it was a gutsy performance from Georgia in the second half, Brandon. Down 14-3. You just knew that Kirby Smart and his coaching staff would adjust. You knew those players would recommit. And they really took over the game in the third quarter. The opening drive was impressive. The defenses forced a 3-and-out and then another drive, another scoring drive. And I think we knew it was over then. Certainly they put the icing on the cake there in the fourth quarter with the Cash Jones touchdown. But just such a momentum swing, Brandon. And more than anything, the names and the faces have changed. But the way that Georgia responded, that's coaching and that's culture. And while I heard what you said, certainly they don't have a Clemson game behind them or an Oregon game, and there's reason to wonder what the upside may be. But I'll tell you what, there's still a championship culture there and an identity, a physical, determined identity. And to me, that was the biggest takeaway. That may be a very valuable win down the stretch as these players now know they've been in battle together. They can trust one another to come back and fight with their backs against the wall.
I think the biggest conversation starter for those in Athens today and those watching on TV was the slow start that Georgia gets off to here offensively. Now, third quarter, a little bit of a different type thing. Georgia scored the points it needed to win, and I agree with you. I do think that Georgia should get credit for that. But, boy, it was a very hot topic here through 2 quarters, just the really inability to kind of find anything explosive and to allow this game to get shrunk on you a little bit. New clock rules, South Carolina moving the football. All of a sudden, these first 2 quarters kind of disappeared just like that. What did you make of the slow start for Georgia offensively today?
Well, a couple of things. Number one, I think you got to look at the Georgia personnel. It's clear to me that Dylan Bell is the other guy to Dejon Edwards, at least until Kendall Melton gets 100%. He's just not effective right now with the hamstrings. I think he tweaked a knee as well today. Dylan Bell, Brandon, is part of the answer, okay? I'm not sure how you fit him in, but watching this guy run, a good forward lean, explosive, you can just see how much quicker he is than the other backs. And, of course, old, reliable Dejon Edwards just in time. He's back after missing the first 2 games. Got to get Kendall healthy. Good to see Brock Bowers. I don't think 100%. Still very good and still better than most everybody on the field, but I think he's missing that gear. I'll tell you what I was really feeling good about was seeing how Lovett and Ra Thomas responded. And again, I know you're talking about the beginning and the slow start. Hey, look, I got to give Spencer Rattler and Shane Beamer a lot of credit. I mean, that's a team, as I'm watching them, and I grossly underestimate them. Let me be the first one to say that. As I'm watching them, I'm going, you know what? This is the team that beat Tennessee and Clemson last year. That didn't happen by accident. Let's give Shane Beamer and South Carolina credit for game planning and really pushing Georgia into those answer plays much earlier than they would have liked. If Georgia could have, Brandon, you know, they want to play conservative. They want to play it easy. Georgia had to get aggressive and go into that attack mentality against South Carolina. They're simply not talented yet. Not good enough yet, I should say, to just overwhelm teams with their talent as we saw last year. They really had to take the gloves off. So I'm going to give South Carolina credit for that, and I'm going to point to some personnel decisions that Georgia is going to have to reevaluate in terms of where they get that ball too early.
Well, I think that's probably true in the third quarter when they started going to rah-rah more, going to love it more. I think that kind of created a little bit of a different spark for the Georgia offense. It's pretty obvious these transfer receivers are going to be big parts of the story here, at least based on what you saw in the third quarter today. They're a big part of this offensive nucleus. But how about the decision-making on the part of Mike Bobo to kind of allow the first half to kind of play out the way that it did? I'm bringing that up because that's the thing right now in our live chats with our folks who are typing in their comments, and here around us, the UGA bookstore, obviously all over social media during the first half of the game. That's the hottest topic of them all. What would you say to Georgia fans right now that kind of want to put Mike Bobo in the spotlight for a really, really slow start offensively here against an opponent we're used to seeing Georgia just rack up tons of points against?
Well, he's not holding the same hand that Todd Monken was. He's got a quarterback making his third career start. We saw how Alabama kind of, hurt themselves last week against Texas with Jalen Milroe throwing a pick. You want to be careful with Carson Beck early. You don't want to cost yourself the game with costly turnovers early. So I think you're going to be a little bit more conservative with Carson than you would maybe Stetson, who was in his third year as a starter. You don't really have the answer guys. Kenny McIntosh, you knew he was a bread and butter guy coming out of that backfield. This backfield, it was Dejan's first start. Kendall's not 100%. You're still feeling your way through it with Bell. There's no Darnell Washington to just collapse the right side of the line. Oscar Delp ain't him. He's getting better and can do some things, but not fair to compare him to a Darnell Washington and what he was able to do. Brock Bowers less than 100%, and you don't have your leading receiver back, Ladd McConkey, there to take off the top. You're dealing with some transfer guys that are still working on getting on the same page as Carson Beck. So, Mike Bobo didn't come in holding the same hand as Todd Monken in terms of the personnel or the continuity of the offense. And he's got to be very careful not to lose these games. Georgia's got a very good defense. And Kirby's going to continue to call these games in a way that leans on the defense because they're the veterans. So I don't think this is as much Mike Bobo as it is Kirby Smart overseeing the game plan, letting Bobo know what type of mix he wants and how dangerous the throws that they're willing to allow Carson Beck to make as he gains confidence and gains experience with this brand new receiving corps. Ra Thomas wasn't here and Lovett wasn't here, and they're the go-to guys. I saw Roseby Jackson go out there for a minute. There's no Ladd McConkey. We talked about Bowers being slow. There's no Darnell. There's no Kenny. It's a new cast of characters. And so I think you want to be careful. I think the head coach realizes that he's got to be careful with this. But backs to the wall in the second half, Brandon, they didn't have a choice. They had to take the gloves off. Carson had to make some throws that were a little bit more dangerous. Dylan Bell was in there to start the drive. Kendall was sitting down. We found out what the Dogs were made of. I don't read too much. I guess what I'm coming down to is I don't read into this being a Bobo Monken thing. I read into this being a brand new Georgia offense that's trying to find themselves and had to do it against a fired-up, upset-minded SEC team. And Spencer Rattler, let me tell you, he played as good as anybody, any quarterback in the nation in that first half. He was amazing.
Mike, good stuff. Enjoy your time there in Gainesville. We'll replay more from you at DawgNation.com. We appreciate you being here on our DawgNation Post-Game Show here at the UGA Bookstore tonight.
All right. Thanks, B.A. Have a good one, man.
All right, good stuff there from Mike Griffith weighing in on Mike Bobo and the Georgia offense. And I think Mike brings up a couple of interesting points that when you look at what happened there in the first half, I think you have to try to decide the brand, the nature of the play calling you saw. Is that strategically what Georgia thought was the best? Is that Georgia trying to get what they can right now out of a young quarterback, or young in terms of his overall experience, a newish quarterback still feeling his way around? It'll be interesting to see how candid Kirby Smart wants to be about that. And ultimately, it certainly did not cost Georgia tonight, but you got to be really, really careful getting off to a slow start offensively that allows a team that has really no business being on the same field with you, because ultimately the South Carolina team that beat Tennessee, beat Clemson a year ago, that team was decimated in the transfer portal during the offseason. There's not a lot, other than the presence of Rattler and Juice Wells who got hurt, there's not a lot of remnants left over from that South Carolina team here on this field here tonight, that you're going to be really careful getting off to a slow start like that, because it does give one of these underdog, upset-minded teams a chance to believe they might have a chance to be in the game. We're going to catch up with Jeff Sentell here in a quick moment. We got some let me do this. I got some folks waiting here. Let me get Jeff Sentell live because he's been waiting. I know he's got a lot to do. Then we'll get more of our folks live here there as well. Jeff, you're on the DawgNation Post-Game Show here at the UGA Bookstore. I know you're busy. I appreciate you being here. thank you for stopping in to weigh in with your thoughts here for a moment. And Jeff, I guess, help us make sense of the good and the bad and everything in between. There were a lot of Georgia fans that did not like what they saw for the first two quarters. Obviously, the second half of this game was a much different version of Georgia. What did you make of it tonight?
Yeah, Brandon, I'm sitting here right now, and I know everybody's going to talk about the slow start. They're going to talk about Marius Mims. You see a lot of these guys walking off the field from this game, and some of them are limping, and they will never probably ever show it. It's just kind of what you do when you sacrifice your body on a Saturday night, and that's just what it feels like after a game. Kind of keys for me is I saw a South Carolina team that said we're definitely not going to try to run the ball at all. I think they had 16 total carries tonight. Short, quick passing game. I mean, let's face it, the only times Georgia's defense has gotten gashed over the last few years is through the air, maybe a lot of quick passes, maybe a lot of, and it was funny. A lot of people were, you kind of heard the cat calls, you kind of heard the boos, and, people were talking about, well, it looks like South Carolina's got the better quarterback. And, you can make that judgment. Just make it with a gradient that I think this is Spencer Rattler's fourth year, third-plus year as a starter, as a starting quarterback in college football. And this is Carson Beck's fourth game, 27 out of 35. I think a big thing, Brandon, the big thing to take away is I was talking to Cedric Von Granger after the game, and I was like, man, when you guys are good, when you guys are clicking, what does that look like? And are you guys there yet? He basically just said, even though I thought the offensive line played pretty well today, especially with Big Mims going out and some shuffling in there with Dylan Fairchild, he just says we got a long way to go. He said he's got a long way to go. The line's got a long way to go. The offense has got a long way to go. Having said all that, Brandon, there was a point in this game where the defense for Georgia continues to be the boa constrictor. And when they want to turn it on and they want to snuff out a team, they definitely could do that. Second half, Georgia got a little momentum. And you just kind of felt guys started teeing off, adjustments were made, and it just kind of felt like to me Georgia defensively is still the same old Georgia. They can really snuff the life out of that team when they want to.
Jeff, I think what's happening right now is this Georgia team is probably suffering from comparisons to the team from a year ago because last year after two games, I had seen all I needed to see. After the Oregon game and the South Carolina game, I was completely sure that Georgia was the best team in the country. That's where go for 2 and 22 kind of came from. It was obvious to me very early last year that the teams that we were told were better than Georgia, like Alabama and Ohio State, they just weren't. That Georgia was going to end up being the best team in the country last season. I think right now through 3 games, that same level of confidence would be totally misplaced. Now, Georgia still might pick to win the national championship. I'm not changing that. What I am saying is that the South Carolina game, I said this all week on DawgNation Daily, the South Carolina game had been and was the perfect measuring stick because this is the opponent that in the 2 national championship years, Georgia has just taken to the woodshed. And they didn't do that tonight. So just speaking broadly and simply, I think it's fair to say that this Georgia team at this point in this season is nowhere near where the last 2 national championship teams were at the same point in the same season. This is a Georgia team that's either just not quite to that level or has a lot of work to do to get to that level. Do you agree with that?
I think that's a good point, Brandon. But I find myself kind of grasping or kind of thinking about this as you make that point. I think maybe part of that might be the problem is everybody's trying to compare how Georgia looked last year, and everybody's trying to want a cookie cutter and kind of template this team onto that when really it doesn't even matter. What matters is how much better is Georgia than everyone else. Here's something I can clearly say. They're not clearly better than everyone else yet. This is a team that's going to have to find itself. It's going to have. And if you said if this game is close, then that's probably not the Georgia we thought they were going to be. I just like a couple of things. I like Dylan Fairchild in there a little bit tonight. I like Ra Thomas in there tonight. And then also, Brandon, everybody wants to talk about where's the home run hitter, where's the explosive factor back as Georgia's trying to get something out of the backfield. I think they always had something with Dajon Edwards. I think people forget that. He was over 100 yards again tonight, got a big spark. And I think they're really trying to manufacture things with like Dylan Bell and Ra Thomas to kind of get this team offensively where it needs to be. You do see a lot of poise from Carson Beck. I won't call him Young Beck because he's been in the system for so long. He's been doing this for so long. But Georgia's not Georgia yet. But I think the best thing here is that nobody else in college football is that Georgia of a year ago either.
No, I think that's a very appropriate comparison, and we'll finish with this, Jeff, and let you get back to your post-game duties here. When you look at the first half, where that's where a lot of the energy for Georgia fans was certainly centered on while it was taking place, to me it looked like a pretty conservative game plan. Georgia seemed to be making safe, relatively easy throws, a lot of screens, a lot of short wide receiver stuff near the sideline. Is that what Mike Bobo thinks is just the best idea, full stop? Or is that what Georgia wants to run because of what they believe that Carson Beck is equipped to do here right now? How do you separate Beck from Bobo in their role in terms of what happened in the first half for Georgia offensively tonight?
Yeah, Brandon, you broke up on me a little bit. I think what I was seeing there with that short passing game, that quick game, was just more that extended handoff type stuff that Kirby Smart was talking about. Georgia still was deliberate in the run game. I think they had about 30, 40 carries, ran for about 250 yards, threw for about 280 yards. You just see this Georgia team, and you just wonder, I mean, they're thirsty, Brandon, for like that explosive guy. They couldn't get Brock Bowers loose tonight. South Carolina made a lot of tackles in the open field. I thought Spencer Rattler ran around, completed a lot of balls. But, again, I think maybe we're spoiled. I can say that with watching Munkin and pre-snap motion and getting guys around and kind of putting the defense in a bind. Maybe we're spoiled with what Munkin's teams look like there. And, again, I mean, you just got to kind of look at it. To me, when I'm watching this football team, it was a very abbreviated first quarter. I think Georgia had one drive. To me, I just sit there and go, here's what Georgia still is. Georgia's still the best defensive team in the country, and they're going to be very hard to beat. But remember how we kept talking about, Brandon, how this team gets to 40, 41, 42 points per game? I think that's going to be a pretty big climb with what we're seeing right now.
Well, let me just leave it at this. It'll be very interesting to see how they improve offensively moving forward from here, Jeff. I think that's good stuff. I know it was a huge day for UGA recruiting. I know you'll have lots of photos and stories coming at DawgNation.com. We'll look forward to reading that from you there. And thanks for being here, a part of our DawgNation Post-Game Show here tonight.
Hey, Brandon, take it easy, man. Keep fighting the good fight, brother.
Thank you so much. Of course, good stuff there from Jeff Sentell. Mike Griffith here before that. We're live here at the UGA Bookstore. We got some more Georgia fans who are going to join us here, too. Let me also remind you, while I have a chance here, as you're enjoying game day, and, of course, we're happy to have football season back. Believe it or not, we're a quarter of the way through the regular season now. Amazing how fast it goes by. But as you're celebrating game day, getting your watch parties and your tailgates, stuff like that together, a great meal catered from our friends at Cercheros is a great way to do all of that, because all of that made better when you use Cercheros for your game day food needs. I'm talking about a burrito party platter, a taco, a fajita bar, and, of course, fresh grilled meats, guac, queso, all your favorite fresh toppings. And the good news is there are 25 locations throughout the state. Of course, right here in Athens, Georgia, for you there as well. Dine in, pick up, delivery, and as we said before, a great catering option there, too. So, Cercheros, the best place for you to go to get some fresh mex on game day. Cercheros.com. The place to go for all of that. Cercheros.com for more on that. We got a couple more minutes left here on our DawgNation Post-Game Show here this evening. Great Georgia fan stopping by to see us. He's got his number 3 jersey on. You love to see that. Tell us your name and tell us what you thought about Georgia here today.
Yes, sir. My name is Patrick Ritchie. I listen to the show every single day.
Thank you, Patrick.
Today's my first Georgia game, and I'm real excited, but I kind of wasn't super excited about what I seen on the field the first half of the day. Especially, I felt like the offense was a little slow, a little vanilla. Especially in the third and long situation, going for a screen pass. I didn't really think that was, the right recipe for success right there. And I think that, going forward, it's going to be interesting to see how the season goes along as far as if we're able to open up the offensive, passing game. And then, with the running backs, I do like how, we're getting some yards and all, but really, honestly, we got a walk-on coming in at running back, and then we got a wide receiver playing running back. That's not ideal either. So I'd also like to see maybe some of our scholarship running backs continue to, improve and do better, especially our, Edwards. We got him back today. He did pretty good. Kendall Milton, he's a senior. I'd like to see more out of him. And Roger Robinson, I really think that he may come along and be a player for Georgia one day eventually, especially you see how big he is, man. That's a big old boy right there.
So can you imagine, Patrick, your first Georgia game, you've been looking forward to coming, I'm sure, for a long time. Where'd you come in from today?
Statesboro, Georgia.
So he's from Statesboro, drives across I-16, heads up 75, gets here to Athens, and the first game, all of a sudden, Georgia's losing at the half. Like, you had to have a big pit in your stomach throughout all that.
I said, you know what, I'm not going to say the L word, but if it happened today, I told myself I couldn't come back to another game because I must have been a bad luck charm. But I was really, really happy that it turned out the way it did, and ended up being a little bit more exciting than, a 27, 28-point favorite we were at the beginning of the game. So, it was a little closer, but, hey.
Well, I'm happy for all of us that turned out to be a Georgia victory, but I'm especially happy for you. You got a chance to see a fun second half to make that first half feel a bit better.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much, Mr. Brandon.
And thanks for being a part of the show, and thanks for listening to our Dog Nation Daily. We look forward to seeing you, hopefully not quite such a long way before your next trip back to Athens.
Hey, when we get back to Wiring Houses on Monday, we're going to be listening to you.
Hey, thanks a lot. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. And anytime you're here getting a chance to come to the game, whether you're coming to your first game, you come to all the games, whatever else, we'd love to let you do what Patrick did right there. Pop over here and share your thoughts as part of our Dog Nation Post-Game Show. That's great comments. And I think what he says about the Georgia running game situation, I think that is absolutely true in that you saw tonight, and Jeff Sentell mentioned this, you know what you've got in Dajon Edwards. And, y'all, don't lose sight of that. 100-plus yards for him on the ground, our J. Stein Law Firm player of the game. Don't lose sight of the fact that you needed all 100 of the yards he provided for you. His return, as Kirby has said, was healthy enough. He could have played the last couple of weeks, but his return, coming back, being able to play for you tonight, that was something that you needed. But the style of running back that he is, tough, hard, physical, you do want to find that counter to that. Okay, so what is that counter right now? Is it Kendall Milton? I'll be honest with you. I don't right now know exactly how fully healthy Kendall is. We were told after week 1 it was 90%. Well, what was it after week 2? I'm not quite so sure. Today he kind of showed you a little bit here and there, but it seems like we haven't quite still seen the absolute best yet this season of Kendall Milton. I hope that is still yet to come. I hope that he's got a gear that he's able to pull up for you that's still yet to come. But while you're kind of waiting about that, and while you're kind of letting a guy like Roderick Robinson grow into that role, it's interesting to evaluate where things are with Dylan Bell right now. I was sitting next to Connor Riley in the press box early fourth quarter when Georgia's kind of sitting on a lead and trying to get out of there with a win. Who got those carries early first quarter? Back-to-back, it was number 86. Now, I joked about this on Twitter. If he's going to be your bell cow that you lean to a little bit in the fourth quarter, you got to get him at 86. You got to give him a running back number if that's what he's going to do. But maybe Bell is kind of becoming that guy a little bit. Obviously, Cash Jones got the touchdown today. We were told, hey, Cash Jones is going to be a weapon catching the ball out of the backfield for you. Well, today he certainly showed that. Is Jones from the kind of category of walk-on going to be the, to use the oldest cliche in the book, is he going to be the lightning to the thunder that Dajon Edwards provides? I think right now, not only are we trying to figure all that out, I also think that Georgia is still in the midst of figuring that all out. Bunch of good Georgia fans will sit around here in a post-game show like this, and we'll talk, and we will, have a lot of chatter, and we'll try to figure out, kind of where all this stands. I think right now these Georgia coaches are sitting in the coach's office somewhere, assuming all the press responsibility and putting aside the recruiting stuff here for a moment. I think they're sitting around an office somewhere trying to figure out the same kind of stuff of who's our best right now? Who are the receivers that we want to try to throw it to and give them a chance to move the chains? Who are the running backs that give us a chance to move the chains and get some hard yards? Right now, I believe these Georgia coaches are asking about that, about their own players, as much as all of us are asking about that here on a Dog Nation Post-Game Show. Now, the good news is you got 9 regular season games to still figure that out. And it may be just objectively true that what I said a moment ago is a fact that Georgia right now may not quite be through 3 games what it felt like it was through 3 games a year ago. Even if that's true, it may just be okay that, hey, this is a different kind of team. Georgia's still trying to figure it all out, and they've got months left to potentially be where they want to be when it is all said and done. So here's what we're going to do. Couple more minutes left as a part of our Dog Nation post-game show here tonight, live at the UGA Bookstore. We'll give you an update on some of the other games that are still out there, ongoing and happening around the SEC, including some real struggles for Alabama that if you're a Georgia fan, I think is going to make you feel even better. We'll give that to you. But also, Kirby Smart getting a chance to speak to reporters. You can see the entire interview on the Dog Nation YouTube page, the full Kirby Smart press conference. But to get a little bit of a sense of the immediate thoughts from Kirby Smart after the game, let's go ahead and hear a little bit of that before we wrap up today as a part of our Dog Nation post-game show here from the UGA Bookstore.
Shane Beamer and his team, what a tremendous job those guys did. They came into a tough environment with some relatively young players who played with great composure and started with a really good plan against us. I thought they out-executed us for sure there in the first quarter. But your kids played hard. They played really hard. The next thing I'd like to thank is our fans. You know, the momentum in the second half was created, number one, by the offense having a really good possession in the second half, but the fan, I think the fans and the feeling of that momentum is a powerful thing. And the momentum of our fans in the second half of sticking with us, sticking by us, and staying with us was incredible, and that momentum turned things around for us and gave us a lot of momentum, so that was good.
What was the message and the mood at halftime?
Calm, composure. We talk about our 4 DNA traits. When things get tough, that's what you do. You rely on your DNA traits. I was pretty excited at half because I said we're going to find out what kind of team we got. And I said, this is it right here. This is our moment. You know, we've had moments in other games, and we're going to try to win one moment at a time in the second half. Nobody's going to go out there and score a 14-point touchdown. You're going to win one moment at a time, play by play. And when we lose a moment, we got to win the next moment. And they kind of bought into that, and the drive allowed us to get some momentum, and that was the difference in the game, the momentum of the second half.
Coach, it seemed like they were having some success early, getting some pressures. I guess what was the key to the adjustment, or if there was a comment?
Well, they didn't seem like they were getting pressure. I mean, they did a good job. You know, when you block 5 guys and do 5 and 6 man protection, and they bring 4 to 5 guys, they're going to get pressure. You got to win quickly. You got to get the ball out. You got to have a good plan. You got to have guys to get the ball. You got to make them pay. You know, they made us pay. We pressured, and they made us pay there on probably the most pivotal play of the game was the first third downs in the red area, and we pressured, and they had a really good call against that pressure. And then we missed about 5 tackles. So I mean, at the end of the day, is it what they did or is it what we did? And their pressure was effective early, and we made them pay for some of it, and we got a running game going. That was the biggest difference.
Dominic Lovett had 5 catches in the second half. Bowers had 4. Just what can you say about those 2 guys stepping up and making plays in the second half when your offense?
Again, I think of those 9, 6 of those or 7 of those were runs. You know, we had this conversation before. Remember? We did. Those were runs. It was good. So those were catches that were runs. So actually, the run game worked a little more, and then the run game you don't recognize worked well too. So both those were good. We take a lot of pride in that because if we're going to struggle to run the ball, or if we're going to struggle to have healthy backs, we have to create it other ways.
Do you expect Dejan to be that effective first game back?
Absolutely. I would expect Dejan to be that effective last week, this week, or next week. He's a good back. He's a tough football player, and we're fortunate that he was healthy today.
What was the injury for Marius, and what did you make of how the offensive line played once he went out?
Well, they practice that way all the time, so it's kind of what we do. You know, we put the next man up, and I don't know, it's an ankle sprain.
All right, good stuff there from Kirby Smart. You hear him there discussing running back Dejan Edwards the day he provided, and y'all, Georgia needs that now. And I hope that you'll kind of process everything that's happening on a show like this. We're talking about the good, we're talking about the bad, and everything in between. Like, don't lose sight of the good. I know the energy is going to go here to the Mike Bobo stuff and the play calling stuff and whatever was going on in the first half, and I get it. I understand that that's the conversation that Georgia fans want to have, and hopefully we've given a platform for some fans to kind of, vent on some of that a little bit. Hopefully we've done a good job of that here tonight, but don't lose sight of some of the other stuff there as well. Georgia got after Spencer Rattler. A pass rush tonight ended up being a really big deal for UGA in terms of kind of slowing him down after he got off to a big start there in the first quarter. The day for Dejan Edwards was also really big for Georgia too, and you heard Kirby Smart talking about that right there. Let me also mention this before we kind of move on, because I don't believe we brought this up yet. None of our callers today have mentioned this either. A little bit troubling for Georgia that Peyton Woodring missed 2 field goals here today. He's now missed 3 on the season, and none of them have been particularly long. So that's one of those deals you're going to be a little bit concerned about. And, Georgia's had 2 kickers since 2016. My daughter's in the 3rd grade. The last time Georgia had a kicker other than Podlesny or Rodrigo Blankenship, she was a baby. I mean, it's been a long time since Georgia has had anything other than just the most sure-footed kicker in the entire SEC, or right there among the most sure-footed kickers right in the SEC. So we all may have to get used to a little bit of a situation where field goals for Georgia are perhaps not quite as automatic as we've gotten used to them being. So that was another note from the game I wanted to make sure that we got for you here. And before we wrap up here today, let's also kind of broaden things out and look at our cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. I want to give you a couple of other SEC scores here, including right now Tennessee and Florida in a real battle. 10:57 to go, second quarter of play. Vols holding on just with skinny 1-point lead, and this really reflects what the chatter had been. You heard me a lot this week talk about the idea that even though we saw Florida play very badly against Utah to begin the season, this was a potentially dangerous spot for Tennessee. They haven't won in the Swamp in a long time, haven't been more than a field goal favorite ever, and for most this week they were sitting right there about a touchdown or so favored. That line actually narrowed a good bit before kickoff here today, and so we'll see if Tennessee can handle its business and get the win against Florida. Remember, for decades now, wins for Tennessee against Florida have not been easy to come by, including last year in which Tennessee was the much better team. Ultimately, they only won the game by 5 points against Florida in Knoxville last year. So kind of a lot going on there for Tennessee and Florida in an early battle. Vanderbilt's on the road at UNLV. They're winning 17-7 right now. Of course, also the big story around the SEC here today is the fact that for Alabama, just 17-3, a final against South Florida. This is on the road in Tampa. And at the end of the first quarter, Alabama was losing 3-0. That 3-0 score lasted at least pretty deep into the second quarter, but eventually Alabama finds some points. Tyler Buckner starts, played very poorly. Alabama seems to have a real mess at quarterback here right now. So whatever offensive struggles you felt like Georgia may have dealt with early in today's game, I can promise you the situation there at Alabama is far worse than that. LSU shows you a lot today. Going on the road, 41-14, get a reciprocal score against Mississippi State. I think Zach Arnett has a potential of being one and done as a head coach in the SEC. I hate to say that, but I believe it could be true. But also for LSU, who, clearly by the virtue of the final score does not look like a nationally elite team based on its game against Florida State. But by going on the road today, they were 9.5-point favored. They win this thing by nearly 30 points. They give you a real indication that this is still a team that's going to be heard from. They won the division a year ago, have a very good chance to still be the class of the SEC West here before it's all said and done. Congratulations to Missouri getting a win at home today against the defending Big 12 champions, Kansas State. That's a little bit of a surprise. Arkansas right now holding on to a touchdown lead against BYU, 14-7, still playing early first quarter there. Let me also see if I can give you a couple of top 25 scores here before we get ready to wrap things up. From top 25 action today, how about Washington blasting Michigan State 41-0? Probably not a surprise there, just given the absence of Mel Tucker, what I think is a pretty messy situation overall in East Lansing. Looks like Florida has scored to take the lead against Tennessee. That now shows 12-7. Michigan playing in the final game of the Jim Harbaugh suspension. They're leading Bowling Green right now, early first quarter. Ole Miss up 10-0 on Georgia Tech. There were some potential injury situations for Ole Miss. Quinshon Judkins, the terrific running back, was thought to possibly miss that game here today. Penn State seemingly no problem with Illinois, 30-13. I think Luke Altmaier threw a bunch of interceptions in that one today. Notre Dame ahead of its matchup next week against Ohio State, beat Central Michigan 41-17. UNC gets the victory against Minnesota, so North Carolina off to a pretty hot start here this year. They're 3-0 on the young season. Duke beats Northwestern 38-14. Anything else from a top 25 standpoint to give you here? Ohio State struggled briefly with Western Kentucky, but obviously pulled away to win 63-10. And, of course, tonight a lot of eyes going to be on Colorado and Deion Sanders. They take on Colorado State. And the kind of weird war of words back and forth between Colorado State coach Jay Norvell and Sanders. This is the first time since 2019 you've had that in-state rivalry game between Colorado and Colorado State. And there's a lot of fireworks ahead of that one here tonight. So we'll let you go and get ready to watch the rest of the college football action. Thanks for being here as a part of our DawgNation Post-Game Show. And for those of you that wake up and check us out on Sunday morning, we appreciate that there too. Whenever you watch it, we're just glad that you did. And the next time, including next Saturday night when you're leaving the game, come on by and see us here at the UGA bookstore. That's always a lot of fun. Big thanks to Royal Caribbean as well for bringing our cruise around the SEC to you. We heard some folks tonight, so they're going to be a part of our DawgNation invasion of the Tennessee River. And another great chance to join DawgNation is on our DawgNation cruise, April of 2024, on board Allure of the Seas. If you go to royaldogs.com, great website, you can find out more about the great DawgNation cruise taking place April in 2024, going to Perfect Day, Coco Cay, Nassau in the Bahamas, and a wonderful, wonderful experience. So big thanks thanks to Royal Caribbean, who makes cruising around the SEC possible for us every day on Dog Nation Daily, but also right here on our Dog Nation Post-Game Show there as well. Also, don't forget, if you want to look as good as I do right now, I say that somewhat sarcastically, the shirt looks good. I don't know if I look good, but the shirt definitely looks good. If you want to have some of this great Georgia apparel, you can get it right down there on the first floor. All the really famous makers, Peter Millar, Vineyard Vines, Johnny O, the Nike coaches gear, all of that right down there on the first floor of the UGA bookstore. So make sure you check that out. We're really, really happy to have this as our home away from home for Georgia home games this season. And next week, the 4th Georgia home game. Hard to believe that after that home slate will almost kind of completely wipe through the home slate almost. It's crazy to think how fast the schedule goes by and just how, I guess, weird sometimes it kind of comes in clusters with home games, then away games, and back here before the season's done. So Georgia gets a win. Wasn't always perfect, wasn't always pretty, but they stay undefeated. They'll stay atop the college football world and coming back ready to fight again next week against the UAB Blazers. New head coach Trent Dilfer. And, of course, we'll see how the rest of the college football landscape plays out around them there, too. So thank you for weighing in via Zoom, live here in person at the UGA bookstore. And we will look forward to seeing you back here again next time as a part of our Dog Nation Post-Game Show. We will talk to you then, everybody.